record. Hello, good evening, everybody. It's good to see you all here, all our usual team. And we are drawing close to the end of our book. So here, basically, this is going to be the second half of the second last chapter. So I'm going to share my screen over here and get going. As I said earlier, it's going to be a relatively short presentation tonight, but then we'll have time for questions. Okay, I'm shrinking everybody down over there. Okay, so we started off last week on covering the internal bits, and it's the title is the internal organs and conditions that are related to those internal organs. And quite a few of these things I see on a fairly regular basis in the practice. And interestingly enough, when I was prepping this, we had just launched our new vitamin D. And you're going to see now where the interest of mine came in, because suddenly we're talking about vitamin D. And we're going to talk about joint and muscle pain. And the constant pain may indicate a deficiency of vitamin D. And if anybody watched Liz Geertz's presentation last night, you will understand a little bit more as to how important this nutrient actually is in our system. And it's been an interest of the SAB for a while, because it's been shown worldwide that vitamin D is lacking in a lot of diets. Vitamin D affects pretty much every organ in the body, as we learned recently, from the brain, especially the respiratory tract, circulation, pancreas, bone, muscle, pretty much the whole body needs vitamin D. So if you have unexplained joint and muscle pain, could be your vitamin D levels are a bit low. And this is a sign when you suffer from constant, non-specific muscle and skeletal pain, or pain and discomfort when the sternum is pressed with the thumb or forefinger. So if you press your sternum with your thumb or your forefinger and it hurts, and you haven't had a car accident recently and been smacked with an airbag, have a look and check and see if your vitamin D levels are possibly low. And a simple way of checking for vitamin D levels is to go and have a blood test done. And they can very quickly pick up if something is low or not. Sternal pain is a sign of vitamin D deficiency. So if you've got all the aching muscles and joints, but you don't have the sternal pain, then maybe it's something else. Could be flu, could be that you've had a workout recently that you're not used to, could even be COVID. But if you push on your sternum, you may find that that is your definitive answer over there. All patients with vitamin D deficiency are at risk of misdiagnosis, because it is in so many parts of the body, and because it often masks other issues or other symptoms are similar. It's often overlooked, because when you're being checked out medically, people tend to look, and doctors tend to look for the obvious. And if the obvious isn't the problem, then you've got to delve deeper. And the comforting thought when you go and visit your doctor is, he might be a doctor, but he doesn't actually know everything. Nobody knows everything. But hopefully he knows where to find the answers and is willing to check deeper and deeper and deeper. And generally, unless it's something very simple and easy, in my field, you have a broken bone and it's sticking through the skin, you know that there's a broken bone over there and you can understand a lot of the issues. But if there's a medical problem that's not apparent, your doctor technically has to rule out what the problem isn't until he can work out what the problem is. So it's a little bit more technical and involved. Almost half of those found vitamin D deficient we're talking 46% over here, were obtaining the recommended daily intake of the vitamin, suggesting that the recommendation is too low. Now, as Liz was saying in the talk on Monday evening or yesterday, the recommendation for vitamin D has now been increased. So when this book was written, it was a while back, and the recommendations were a lot lower. They have since increased them. Those with vitamin D deficiency may be diagnosed with fibromyalgia. It's a big fancy word, but myalgia is pain, and fibro means fibrous or muscle, and that's generally muscle pain. And this will be all over the body. Inadequate vitamin D sets up a chain of events that alters the calcium phosphate levels, making it impossible to mineralize bone. And this is why vitamin D is so important for bone strength. And this is part of the reason why they've added vitamin D in with the calcium and magnesium, because calcium and magnesium obviously work together to build bone, but for the strengthening of it, you need the vitamin D as well. So vitamin D plays a role together with a lot of other things. As we've seen over this whole series, nothing works on its own. And I'm sometimes asked, I don't want to take a whole handful of tablets. Isn't there just one thing that you can have that's got everything in it? And the short answer is no. And if there was, the tablet would be about this big and impossible to swallow. So everything works together in nature. In nature, you will never find an isolate. There's always trace elements and working in synergy with other issues or with other nutrients. Now, the rubbery matrix of bone absorbs water, putting pressure on sensory nerve fibers. So your bone is flexible. I know you think that your bone is strong, which it is, but it's flexible. If you think of a tree that is growing and the wind blows, that tree moves. If it didn't move, it would snap. And this is what happens when our vitamin D levels become low, or our calcium levels become low. The bone loses that rubbery flexibility. And also, if your collagen levels are low, you lose the flexibility in your bone and it snaps. And this is why, sadly, elderly bones, which are generally depleted in calcium, amongst other things, snap so easily. And what scares me at the moment is that I see a lot more younger children, and I'm talking 5 years of age, 6 years of age, who are playing, somebody pushes them over and they snap their wrist. And that for me is a very scary sign, because a small child like that shouldn't be breaking bones. If they do fracture, they should have what they call a buckle fracture, where literally it means a bending of the bone, or a green stick fracture if the forces are bad enough. Think of a green stick where you break it and only part of the stick breaks and the rest stays together. And that is known as a green stick fracture. And that is what generally children's bones should do. But I'm seeing a lot more where they're actually snapping, and that for me is quite scary, because I know that they're missing nutrients. And vitamin D deficiency contributes to poor bone development in youth and the risk of bone fractures in the elderly. And as we saw in the recent presentations, we're talking rickets and osteoporosis. And that is a very nasty thing to have. So how do we get enough vitamin D? Vitamin D has always been known as the sunshine vitamin, because that is what happens. You go outside, you spend some time in the sun, and your skin gets relatively tanned, and your body converts the ultraviolet light via your liver to vitamin D. What's the problem? We are not spending enough time out in the sunshine. Why? Because, well, today's lifestyle doesn't really allow that, but also people are more scared about skin cancer. So when you go outside, you're covered up in sunscreens, in shirts, in hats, in scarves, in whatever. Your skin isn't seeing the sunlight. Now, here at the coast, we often see people out surfing. In summer, they're just wearing a bikini or a pair of trunks or something like that, which is great because they are getting most likely more than enough vitamin D. But if you are completely covered up with a wetsuit or sunscreen or scarf or big sun hat, etc., you're not getting that exposure to the sunlight that you need to get the vitamin D. But it's not just sunshine that has vitamin D. We also get it from your good oils, like your cod liver oil, caviar. Anybody wants to try that? Things like mackerel, salmon, sardines, tuna, mushrooms, raw milk, not pasteurized white water milk, but actual raw milk fresh from the cow, and eggs, preferably organically grown. The great majority of our vitamin D would come from sunlight if we were spending sufficient time outdoors. But the sad part is we're not. And also, a dark skin or a sunscreen with an SPF factor of 8 or more can block most of the vitamin D formation in the sun. Now, one of the talks I listened to at some stage said, if you're spending time out in the sun, you need a fair amount, probably about 30 to 40% of your body exposed to the sunlight. In summer, probably about 30 minutes will do it. In winter, a whole lot more than that will do it. But obviously in the middle of summer, it gets hot and you perspire. So what do? You've been outside, you come in all sweaty and wet, and you go and wash your skin, have a shower, or something along those lines. Now, your problem there is you've washed away your vitamin D because the skin absorbs the ultraviolet lights, and then through the perspiration, that is the start of the process for absorption into the skin, into the liver, for conversion to vitamin D. So maybe stay a little bit sweaty for a while when you come inside. Give your body a chance to get that vitamin D into it. Little vitamin D forms in the skin during the winter months in the northern latitudes, even if considerable time is spent outdoors. So the further away you are from the equator, the less vitamin D you're able to get from the sun. And they found that specifically in the northern parts of the world, in winter, there's a lot more depression and there is a lot more fractures that happen because of this lack of vitamin D. Deficiency of this vitamin is undesirable as vitamin D inhibits cell growth, and that it stops the protection from tumors, and it helps to prevent autoimmune diseases and reduces blood pressure and protects against heart disease. So vitamin D is crucial for these sort of things. So it prevents your cancerous growths. So maybe it's an idea to take extra vitamin D along with the carotenoids to limit your risk of developing a skin cancer instead of putting the sunscreen on. Just a thought, just an idea. I don't have the scientific evidence for it, but look at the theories over here, it might work. Dr. R. Paul St. Armand found disordered calcium and phosphate metabolism in fibromyalgia. It's a lot of fancy technical words over there, but people with fibromyalgia weren't absorbing calcium or phosphate correctly. And this is a phenomena observed with several other conditions that have been associated with excessive sugar intake, magnesium, and vitamin D deficiency, or infection with a nanobacteria, nano meaning really, really small. And these are your gut bacteria that can really cause a lot of grief in the intestine, which then spreads to the rest of our system. Because remember, if our digestive system is not working properly, we are going to be in big trouble. Dr. Armand observed that those with fibromyalgia tend to have fingernails that break or peel very easily. Another indication that your calcium and phosphate is not being absorbed correctly. So some fibromyalgia symptoms include pain in the muscles, pain in the bones, no energy, headaches, dry eyes, and a whole lot of other issues over there. So some of your trigger points, as you can see in this little picture, are your main joints, your neck, your thyroid issue, your thyroid area, your knees, your hips, your pelvis, lower back, all those areas. According to Dr. Armand, if fibromyalgia is allowed to progress unchecked, it will eventually lead to joint damage. Fibromyalgia generally is pretty difficult to diagnose. Remember I said earlier, you've got to rule out what the problem isn't before you can figure out what the problem is. And because fibromyalgia mimics so many other symptoms, it's very, very difficult to diagnose. You also found that medications that improve gout also improve fibromyalgia, which is an interesting connection over there. It is of interest that vitamin C appears to be important in prevention of both gout and osteoarthritis. Vitamin C being an antioxidant, water-soluble antioxidant, but also is one of the things necessary to help your body to create collagen, which will help with flexibility in the bones and the arteries, for that matter. Fibromyalgia and chronic pain may be caused or aggravated by allergic responses, immune dysfunction, and repair deficits resulting from poor nutrition. Again, we see that nutrition, this is why nutrition is so vital. Remember the old story? It's often say, diet is what you eat, nutrition is what your body absorbs. So you might be having a very, very healthy diet, or think you are, but if you're not absorbing it, you are ending up with problems. Also, if you have an allergic response to certain foods or chemicals, as we've covered in previous talks, you're going to end up with problems. And an immune dysfunction is basically just a short circuit of your immune system. In a research study for food and chemical intolerances, reactive items included MSG, which is often hidden in a lot of processed foods. And if you're going to a restaurant, you'll often have MSG there. Candida albicans, caffeine, coffee anyone? Food coloring, chocolate, another common one over there, shrimp, dairy products, sulfites, which you'll find in things like bacon and dried vorse and biltong, etc. Xylene, which you'll find in Koki pens, yogurt, aspartames, your artificial sweeteners, BHA, cadmium, lead, Tylenol, which is a pain medication, which I don't think is available here in this country, sodium benzoate, which is a very common preservative, and orange. So those are some of the things where you could have intolerances. And I know my system does not like MSG. So I carefully scan labels, but if I happen to have something that does have MSG in it, specifically for supper, I don't have a very good night that night. Allergic responses weaken the immune system because they elicit an immune response. And this is what happens, is that with your immune system, if you have a bacteria or bug or virus that enters your system, it triggers a response, sort of like an armed reaction. Your house is broken into, your alarm triggers, and you have an armed response guard that comes out. That is how our immune system works. So there's an alarm, there's a trigger, and you have the security guards rushing out to come and see what's happening, and they take care of the problem. But with an allergic response, your body gets confused, and it will be a little bit like having 3 different armed response vehicles arriving, going into a house, and then turning on themselves and attacking each other, not the criminal that happens to be in the house. That is more or less what happens with an autoimmune issue, arthritis being autoimmune, amongst other things. The result of strong allergic responses to foods or chemicals is that the immune system becomes distracted from its primary task of protecting the body against invading bacteria and viruses. So it's so busy fighting itself that it actually forgets about the bacteria and the viruses in the background, and they go ahead and they cause a lot more problems. Instead, the immune system attacks the food remnants or chemical residues, creating inflammation and increased susceptibility to viral and bacterial attack, because now your body is weaker and it's easy for the enemy to overcome you. So the suggestions: obtain adequate exposure to sunlight, but you have to be careful that you avoid burning of your skin. There's a very careful balance between having too much and too low. So when UV is 3 or above, sun protection is a priority. If it's below 3, sun protection is not recommended. Go indoors in the middle of the day to support your vitamin D production, and being physically active like gardening or going for a walk will help if the UV is below 3. If it's more than that, you're going to be in trouble. You need to take precautions accordingly. We need to reduce sugar and refined carbohydrate consumption. You can see again that common thread throughout most of the conditions: sugar, carbohydrates, or specifically refined carbohydrates, are problems in the body. 6 easy ways to cut back on sugar. Obviously, make food yourself, but also check labels. You can enlarge that later on the replay if you want, or I can find that picture again and send it to you if you want. But just be aware of what you're eating. Complex carbohydrates do have sugar, but because they're complex, they also have vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and fiber. Simple carbohydrates, which is your sugars, don't have any of that. So all of that stuff has been removed, and your sugar itself is the problem. We need to supplement with cod liver oil, particularly in the winter months. Now, I do believe that those of us down here on the South Coast, or even in Durban, don't have as much of an issue because we are blessed to have sunlight most of the time. But if you're down in the frozen south in the Eastern Cape and you're continually covered up for nearly 8 months of the year, you've got a problem, and you need to supplement with your vitamin D and your cod liver oil. So in that case, I would recommend the vitamin A and D. I won't get into the differences between the vitamin A and D and the vegan D at this stage, but the dosage of D is the same. The compound is slightly different, and there are little differences that one can pick up, and I would recommend one or the other for certain things, but I won't get into that right now. And obviously there's the vegan D that we have now. And we need to supplement with all essential nutrients. Again, that is your basis. If your foundation is wrong, you're going to have problems further up. Like building any house, you have to have a good foundation. If your foundation is not right, you're going to have problems. There is our foundation, the Pro Vitality. You should actually include the protein as well. So your breakfast pack is a very good foundation program to get everything that you need. Right, need to speed things up a little bit. And test for vitamin D deficiency. Blood test. So go to your doctor, ask him to do the test and to check and see. And also, while you're there, let them test for food allergies, because that is a common problem. A basic test that you can do, it's called the pulse test. Exactly as it says, take your pulse. If you have a fancy watch, you can let that take your pulse for you. But it's very simple to take your pulse. Anybody can do it. And the pulse rate tends to increase after eating a meal if you have a bigger problem with it. So why is this thing not going? There we go. The pulse rate over 84 beats per minute after eating often indicates an allergic response or an infection. The rise in pulse rate is accompanied by the release of adrenal hormones, which enable the body to deal with allergens. So it's an automatic response, part of the fight and flight syndrome, all of that reaction. So remember, you get a fright, your adrenals kick in, release adrenaline, and increase the pulse rate, preparing your body for defense. Same sort of thing happens with an allergen, prepares your body for a defense. Conduct of the test requires avoiding known allergens, such as cigarette smoking, at the time of the test. So try and get your body in as good a rest as possible. According to Dr. Arthur Coco, you should take the pulse before a meal and 3 times after a meal at half-hour intervals. So the before meal is sort of your control pulse. And then after your meal, take your pulse every half an hour for about an hour and a half. You should also take your pulse at bedtime and just after waking in the morning. And you can chart it and see. Again, as I said, if you've got a fancy phone or a fancy watch, often there are apps and things that will check your pulse for you and actually store it, and you get a better idea of what's happening over there. And Dr. Coco found many health conditions associated with foods with this technique. Very simple, very cheap technique, but not a definitive, just as an indication that maybe you should check further and see what's happening. And the problems include allergies, digestive pain, migraine, chest pain, and other things along those lines. So the suggestions: foods to which one is allergic should be avoided. Sounds logical, sounds simple, not always easy to do. And we need to support the adrenal function to improve intolerance. Adrenals are very delicate little things, and they need to be supported as much as possible. And we need to test foods to see if the pulse rate is altered. So if you suspect that you have an allergy or an allergic response to a certain food or an intolerance to a certain food, do the pulse test. Very simple and easy to do. And that is the end of that chapter. So I'm going to stop sharing. And if anybody has any questions, please unmute yourself and fire away. I'll keep recording for another couple of minutes. Any comments, any questions? You can see vitamin D is very, very important.
I took my first vitamin D last night.
Good.
I slept well, very well. I woke up early because I had to get to East London. And tonight I'm exhausted. I took a vitamin D this morning. In fact, I took 2 vitamin D this morning because I went into Johnson & Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm working with their people. So I thought, let me increase all my immune system boosters. And I am absolutely, totally finished tonight. So is it a coincidence? I don't know.
Check it and see over a period of about another week or so, and just see how you do.
I'm gonna take another one tonight.
Just don't fall asleep in front of your class.
Why?
You could scare them a little bit. Right.
Sean, may I
Yes.
ask something?
Yeah, go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I was confused with my mute and unmute. I don't know if this is maybe not 100% relative to the session tonight, but I want to ask a question, which is important. It's for me personal. I must have hurt my legs. First, I had a problem with my left leg, and then it was right doing exercise in the morning. Now, I don't do strenuous exercise, not a lot, but amongst others, I do stretching and what do you call it, sit-ups and whatever. But I found before that I've hurt my right arm with the exercise. I was like immobile in that arm for about 3 to 4 months. I couldn't even take a parking ticket out. I had to get out of the car because I couldn't stretch my arm. I had to take and face the parking possibility.
Okay.
It was horrible. But anyway, I started having leg pains and I couldn't make out whether it was in my hip. Where it was from my hip down to my knee. At about 5-6 weeks ago, and it just got worse and worse. When I sit, and I get up, I can't walk, whatever, long
Mhm.
stories. And I'm taking all the supplements. I think it's something like tendinitis. I've done a lot of research.
Mhm.
All the supplements relating to muscles and whatever. I just want some advice. Yesterday, the day before, my neighbor said, "Why don't you put your feet up?" I've never thought of that, but you're working the day, you sit at the table, it's not possible. Do you have any advice on how I can get my legs better? Research also say you mustn't leave something like that too long.
Correct.
But I really I'm not going to go into the supplements. I promise you, I take everything and I take enough, more than enough.
Are you taking
What can I
magnesium?
do? Yeah, I do it all. The magnesium, the D, the zinc, the omega, the vitamin E, the C, all of that, and I take enough.
And you're taking vitamin E as well?
E, yeah, for circulation, yeah.
Okay, good.
And I even spread everything out now through the day because I'm absolutely desperate to get it right.
All right. Do you notice any sort of...
The mistake I did is that I stepped, and I think that was my mistake, why I started healing. I walked up the staircase by Spar and New Life. I walked up, it was sore, and I did that so many times, and even in my complex. And then I saw in my research, you must rest your legs. So now drive around with my car.
Rest is always best. And maybe do a few stretching exercises before you start to move.
That's what I do actually. I do, and I rub my legs. I stand still and I stretch a little bit, and then I start. As soon as I'm moving, it's better. But to get up,
because it warms up. Okay. You can up your omega-3 because it's an anti-inflammatory. So if you're only taking one,
I take 3.
Okay.
I take 3. I take 3C. I take 3 zinc. I take the D and D. I take it almost. I take even more. I think I hurt it by walking and doing all the. I didn't rest it.
Yes. So rest is best. What you can do for a localized injury, sometimes physiotherapy makes a very big difference over there, where they use their ultrasounds and their fancy machines and things. That might be an option, because if you've got some micro tears inside that are not healing enough because you're not resting enough, that needs to get treated via physiotherapy. You can also try heat packing. That should go a long way to helping as well, especially if it's a muscle spasm. I will do a little bit more research on that for you and see what I can come up with.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking of some therapy, but really, I can live with pain and uncomfort, but I wanted to heal. I really wanted to really heal. That worries me a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Can I just add something?
Yes, we're about to run out of time, so if we crash, that's why.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry for taking so much of the time.
No problem.
Okay. I started doing yoga. A while back, and one of the exercises they always do at the end of the session is to if you sit on the floor and put your bum up against, sorry, excuse the language, but put your bum up against the wall and lift your legs up the wall and stay there